and welcome to the Game Changers podcast, where you'll hear from trailblazing, fearless women in sport. I'm Sue Anstiss, a founding trustee of the Women's Sport Trust charity and the founder and CEO of Promote PR, one of Britain's leading sports PR agencies. In this episode, you'll hear from the broadcasting legend Clare Balding, OBE. Clare has worked on many of the highest profile sporting events, including 6 Olympic and 5 Paralympic Games, 5 Winter Olympics, the boat race, Wimbledon and the Grand National. She's also an ardent campaigner for better coverage of women's sport. As you can imagine, I found it pretty daunting to interview the queen of the sports interview herself, but Clare was incredibly kind, sharing lots about her life, her work, and all she's doing to help increase the profile of women's sport in the media. Clare and I met for breakfast at Bill's and began the interview outside in the sunshine. I started by asking Clare about her earliest memories of sport.
My dad was absolutely sport obsessed. So I grew up watching a lot of cricket, a lot of rugby union, a lot of racing, because my dad was a racehorse trainer. But he's obsessed with sport. I tried to make him watch some of the Netball World Cup, but he wouldn't really have it, and I got so annoyed with him saying stupid things that I let him turn over, and I just went to watch it somewhere else. But that's why. So I grew up riding, and I wanted to, in my dream, I'd have gone to the Olympics as an event rider, as part of the British team, but I was never good enough. And so equestrian sport is a major love of mine.
When did you first sit on a horse? Can you remember?
Oh, before I could walk. So yeah, that was riding was absolutely what I was doing from probably pre-toddler. I know I broke my collarbone at 2, with 2.5 falling off. But your bones are soft,
Really little. Mm. And obviously you mentioned eventing and flat racing as well. So you were the champion lady rider in 1990. For those that have just ever sat on a horse on holiday, how does it feel to ride at speed, at pace on a horse?
It's an amazing thrill, actually. And I was down at home this morning watching the horses on the gallops. They are so refined, and thoroughbred racehorses are, the Ferraris of the horse world. They move very fast, but also when you're in a race, you've got to react quickly, you've got to see gaps. And anybody who's driven cars in races will absolutely understand this. You are anticipating movement ahead of you, and you're conscious of what's going on behind you. But yeah, all those things, you're constantly seeing gaps, or if you've been jumping, and I rode in point to points as well as riding cross country for eventing, you're seeing a stride. So at the end of an escalator, this sounds so ridiculous, but those tramolator things at airports? Yeah. I'll be looking for the stride from about 100 yards out, of trying to get the stride right to get off it at speed.
Like a long jumper.
These aren't very transferable skills, but it makes me laugh.
And did you see, were there women racing on horses clearly you did, but did you see many female women racing?
It's interesting, in the amateur world, yes, lots of women, because it's okay for women to succeed as long as you're not paying them. I was champion amateur, male and female actually, because nearly every year the leading female rider was also the leading rider, because we were better and we had more opportunities. We tended to win the mixed races as well as our own, and we worked. All of us rode out every day. It's one of those, in an amateur sport, you've got to be able to afford to do it. So quite often it would be daughters of trainers who were going to get that opportunity, or the secretary who worked in the yard who also rode out. The best amateur when I was riding was a woman called Maxine Cowdery. She married Graham Cowdery, the cricketer. Anyway, as Maxine Juster, she worked for Michael Stout, was his secretary. She was small and neat and really good, and she rode every day. She rode the horses, but she couldn't be paid for riding horses. She could be paid to be the secretary and still ride as an amateur. But we got really good prizes. I won a car. I won a Mini, the first car I ever drove, but I also won my weight in champagne. I didn't win a diamond necklace because I never won the diamond race, but Maxine did. She won it a few times. It was really fun, but it was one of those things I had to work really hard to lose the weight to do it. So once I got to university, it was going to be difficult to run and sweat every day as well as ride every day and study, so I just couldn't.
Today, do you think there's still so few women out riding, that we see the occasional riding? Why do you think that is now? Why Has that not changed?
The numbers are definitely growing, and interestingly in the yards, at least 50%, if not more, of the workforce are female. It's when they're given the chances, and I find it still quite depressing. If you look at the numbers of female jockeys who ride in Group 1 races, which is the very top level, it's tiny. In France, they have a system where the female jockeys get a weight allowance, and that's really dramatically changed the uptake. It's not to do with lack of ability, and it's certainly nothing to do with weight, because the girls are lighter.
That's what I've always thought. It's almost like one of the few sports where it's a benefit because you need to be light and small.
Yeah, it's a huge benefit, and as we know, it is all about the horse that you're on. It's 80% horse and 20% jockey, and women still aren't getting the chance at the top level. And I don't know whether that's a reluctance of some of the owners to pick a female rider. I think there's, with the punters who would be very alpha male, I think there's always that, they can be quite ignorant about use of the whip, for example, and think the more you hit a horse, the faster it goes. That's definitely not true. But it's really interesting for me, if you look at sports where men compete against women, and sailing and equestrian sports are the two, I think having financial independence is more to do with it than gender.
Yeah.
So women who could fund themselves or run their businesses successfully so they could sell horses, or in sailing terms get sponsors, or be able to just afford to do it, they gave themselves their own opportunities. They were their own bosses. They weren't relying on somebody else to make that decision. And there's something, it seeps right through racing, that women are fine as secretaries, fine as half your workforce, fine as, there are very few trainers who are women, but essentially the wives of trainers do a hell of a lot of work, a hell of a lot, with the owners. But as soon as you get to, and all jockeys are paid the same, by the way, for their rides. As soon as you've got to pay a jockey £110, and the agents are ringing up and pushing on behalf of the ones they represent, there is something that happens in the trainer's head or the owners' heads that say, we'd be better off with, and I'm not talking about Frankie Dettori over Hayley Turner, I'm talking about Paul Mulrennan over Hayley Turner, who you probably never heard of. No, he's a perfectly good jockey, but he's not Frankie, It's not like you're getting a really vastly the best there's ever been, and great entertainment and great with the owners and all of that. When they're given equal chances, at the Shergar Cup, there's always a women's team, and the rides are allotted, so nobody's got a choice over it. Hayley Turner's been leading jockey at that meeting the last 2 years.
And will it change? How will it change if it's a change of attitude over time?
Well, as I say, in France, they've tried to change it by the £3 weight allowance, and that really has made a difference, because obviously everybody will look for an advantage with their horse, and if you can carry £3 less in weight for a jockey that essentially is as good.
So why are they giving them a £3 advantage?
Because they're trying to promote women in racing. As a way of showing that if you give women the opportunity, they can ride at the top level.
I guess the danger is then it's at 3 sets, 5 sets, the women have got an unfair advantage.
Until it's equal, and I mean by equal, I mean equal opportunities. Until that happens, I think you've got to create a situation in which you're increasing the chances of women getting those rides. There have only been 3 women in the history of the Derby. There have only been 3 women who've ridden in it, and all of them were on outsiders. The first woman who rode in it was Alex Greaves on a 150-1 shot. Of course she was going to finish last. It was a rubbish horse.
Yeah. It all got a bit too noisy, with lorries passing us as we sat outside at Bill's, so we moved indoors for the rest of the interview. I asked Claire if she was inspired by any female sporting role models when she was growing up.
So my absolute heroine growing up was Lucinda Green. Lucinda Bryan-Palmer, as she was. She won badminton for the first time, I think, when she was still 19. She might have been just 20. Fearless cross-country. She won badminton 6 times on 6 different horses. Everybody recognised her as the leading, certainly cross-country rider in the world. And obviously she was a woman. So it didn't even occur to me that women couldn't ride on a level, if not better, than men. And that's why, in many ways, equestrian sport is really, I still love watching it. I still love the fact that gender doesn't come into it at all. If you are good enough and you can get the better horses, you will win gold medals.
Fantastic that there is that quality that there isn't with other sports. You mentioned earlier your career and going off to university at Cambridge to read English, and Germaine Greer was one of your supervisors there. Do you think her attitude to the place of women in society influenced your views?
Jermaine is interesting because she's academic about it, and she was looking at different fields and she had a different experience. You know, I grew up in a household where, without a shadow of a doubt, my father did not think that A, women could train racehorses, and B, he thought there were a lot of jobs that women couldn't do. Probably presenting Grandstand, which was the flagship sports programme at the time, would have been on his list of things that women couldn't do, and certainly not his own daughter. But his attitude changed because it had to, because I was going to go and do that. And I'm just terribly aware that there's a lot of subconscious bias that we inflict on ourselves, that we count ourselves out of situations. And I think partly out of naivety, partly out of stupidity, I put myself in situations that some people would have deselected themselves from and just thought, yeah, I can do this, in a way that men do all the time. With a massive amount of chutzpah, they go, yeah, I can do this. And I just think a better balanced society would allow more talented people opportunities. That's all. And I want to try and create some kind of shift change where women's sport is almost a flag bearer for other parts of society, where actually female athletes across the board have respect and reward. Male footballers and their pay, and as we know that it's a business that is pretty hard to sustain outside of the Premier League, and even in the Premier League, I would think even in the Premier League there are businesses that are really only just staying afloat because male footballers are paid way beyond the scope of reality. And that distances them from their fans, which I think is really sad, who are then having to still pay 45 quid for a shirt that's changed, one corner of it's different this season to last season, so you go buy a new one. I think that's not what women's sport, and certainly women's football, should aspire to. Women's football has a chance of becoming what we wish men's football was.
Yeah, absolutely.
It really does have that chance. It'll be fascinating to see what happens as it becomes commercially more successful. Will the Premier League try and take it over? And I suspect that might be the case. Can the FA maintain some form of control and put things in place where actually girls and young women are really nurtured through a system that can chew people up and spit it out? And it happens to a lot of boys, that they are kicked out at 14, 15, where they've missed crucial bits of school, and it kind of damages them for the rest of their lives. And I'd love to think that doesn't have to be the case in women's football. I would love the reward structure to be better. I'd love the FA Cup to have a real vibe around it, and Wembley to be packed, and the semi-finals to matter as well, and people to be aware of clubs and follow players and know what they're like, and how they play, obviously. But this was always going to be a big year. 2019 was always going to be a massive year because it's not an Olympic year. There wasn't a men's World Cup to compete with, Football World Cup that is. The combination of the Women's Football World Cup and the Netball World Cup happening so close together, and actually, virtually overlapping, and Wimbledon being right there as well. That meant women's sport was going to be at a level of exposure it had never been at before. But do you know what? As soon as the Premier League season started again, you'd open a newspaper and go, well, the women clearly aren't doing anything today. And again, not on the Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday or Thursday. Oh, there's a tiny little 2 lines there about Charlotte Dujardin being eliminated at the European Championships. And just think, come on guys, there's so much written that's not really news, but just creates a noise around male sport. Anyway, we're getting there.
Yes. And broadcasting, you mentioned your dad saying you wouldn't be presenting Grandstand.
I don't think he said it out
loud. No, in his head, in his mind. But when did the idea of broadcasting, or you're wanting to broadcast, present itself to you?
To be brutally honest, it didn't really. I wish I could pretend I drove this whole thing and had a vision and thought, I want to go and present the Olympics. I really didn't. The one thing I think I've done, and I say this to much younger people who want to come into the industry, the one thing I've always done is said yes to things that scared me a bit and that took me to different places or took me totally out of my comfort zone. So when I left university, I had the opportunity to do some racing bulletins on Radio 5, as it was before it became 5 Live. And I said yes. And they were very early starts, and I wasn't living in London at the time. I was living at home with my parents, so I'd, hammer up the motorway in the Mini that I won, riding in races, and do those early morning bulletins. And then I was looking for a job that could actually pay me enough to live in London. And then I got offered a job as a trainee in BBC Sport, which was nowhere near the level all my university mates were on, because they'd gone off with their, everyone going, oh, there's a fancy degree. They'd gone off into different industries, a lot of them into the city, but some of them into accountancy or, advertising is where I probably would have gone and got offered a job in advertising. But suddenly here was this amazingly exciting world, and I always loved radio. I think it's very intimate media. I think people really focus on what you're saying and how you're saying it, because they're not distracted by the fact that you're wearing a stripy shirt that's a bit crumpled and clearly you've never ironed in your life, or that your hair's all floppy because you just washed it that morning. Do you know what I mean? They're not distracted by anything the way you look. And I thought, this is different, and no one in my family had worked in the media. And I thought, okay, let's give this a go.
Was it fairly equal male-female in training at the time?
No, and in the sports room, Eleanor Oldroyd and Charlotte Nichol would have been the only other female voices on it. But I was part of, we had a really good bunch of people. Marcus Buckland, Mark Pugach, Ian Payne was there at the time, Peter Drury, John Champion. Some really, really good, nice people. And
supportive of women, young women coming through.
I don't know that. I think this is a bit strong. No, some were very supportive. Ellie was brilliant, because she wanted, to help, and still we're very, very good friends now, and I'm very conscious that the right things said to you at the right time are massively influential. Alice, my partner, always says I'm offering career advice without unsolicited career advice, but and I do probably, and I'm conscious now. I'll stop and say, look, do you want me to give you feedback?
But a sentence or two can send someone in a stratospheric different direction.
Yeah, I would hope so, and I think particularly when you're young, you probably are more sensitive to people not being helpful, and my God, you remember it when they're not. So I always try to make sure that I am.
And did you face sexism, do you feel, as a woman working in sport at that time on the radio?
Not that I noticed in most sports that I covered. Now, obviously in racing, I had the huge advantage that people knew my surname, and Frankie Dettori's about the same age as me, and we kind of grew up I knew him really well because he rode for my dad. He was then the biggest star, so when he rode his Magnificent Seven, I was there as the reporter, and hey Claire, how you doing? And that really helps, and it sets a tone amongst the other jockeys as well, and trainers, and I could get to people because I knew them, or I knew how to find their number. And actually you become very clever at contact, in the sense that I knew there's this publication called the Directory of the Turf that had every single trainer and jockey's number and owner in it. Now, most people in the sports room wouldn't know that, but I knew I could get a number for Jenny Pittman, or I could get a number for Henry Cecil. Not just because I'd ring, my mum, but because I knew where to look. Yeah. So I've always been very aware of that a lot of what you do, and it doesn't matter what part of the industry you're in, a lot of it is about being smart, working smart. With the Olympics, the first Olympics I went to cover was 96 in Atlanta. We didn't really have, the internet was there, but it wasn't really working. You couldn't get it on your phone, but you work out ways in which you can get information that will add to your broadcast. So essential storytelling is going to be richer if you've got more information to put into it. And that's how I always looked at it.
And that's masses of research you do, isn't it? That was one of my later questions, of covering so many sports events. How do you gain that knowledge, retain that knowledge across sports where you haven't been immersed as you were in horse? I love that. So I've got a sort of brain that needs, the equivalent of a breakfast buffet. I need lots of different things from lots of different areas just to keep me interested. I love variety. I like being part of a team, but I work on my own. I'm a self-employed freelance, so I like jumping in and suddenly being, the Olympics, 16 days work in a row, really long hours, in a team. My job there is keep myself fit, and mentally fit is what I mean, and keep myself positive, because it's nothing worse than feeling you're dragging someone along with you. So when the research is almost part of feeding my brain to keep me up.
And I really enjoy it. And obviously it's like a teacher teaching different subjects, or a lawyer picking up different cases, or a politician doing... Loads of people do this all the time. It's just I do it in sport. So when I go to do equestrian sport, it's slightly easier because, frankly, I would know more of it anyway. But let's now do rugby league.
Rugby league,
yeah, which I loved. You can learn an awful lot by listening. And by asking the right questions. And when you realise that the viewer doesn't mind if you ask the question that they would have asked, and you don't need to know the answer, you need to listen to the answer. You don't have to be the know-all. And sometimes I try and resist the urge to show all my homework. I need to know it, but I don't need to tell you, the viewer, that I know it. I need my expert, so whether that's Mark Foster in the swimming, or Becky Adlington, or Chris Hoy in the cycling, you want to hear them. You don't want to hear me. And it's asking the right question to them to get them to tell you the really interesting thing that I know you're going to love. And interviewing has always been my real, I love asking people questions. I'm really nosy.
And as a female presenter, I think female presenters do get more criticism sometimes from other media, and with social media now, from fans and from viewers as well. Do you think that's changing?
I am really disciplined about social media, and actually I was talking to Charlotte Dujardin about this and about how you can protect yourself but also control the narrative. When I started, and I'm really glad I didn't start in a world where social media was there, because it would have definitely thrown me off course without a shadow of a doubt, and in certain instances could have ended my career. So I use Twitter and Instagram. I don't use Facebook. It's done. Somebody does it, but I don't. I just don't really get Facebook. I don't know why, but I don't. And I will have instances where I know last year there was a bit of a Facebook campaign over something that was written in a paper that was really poorly presented. I mean, it wasn't. It was so far off the truth of the situation. But I didn't know this thing was happening on Facebook where everyone was having a go, led by the journalist who'd written the piece. And a friend of mine who's a producer rang me and she said, you ought to be aware of this. So I talked to my agents and said, look, there's something going on here that I think is A, is not right, and B, could be very damaging. And their attitude is just let it happen. And my attitude was slightly, no, I think we kind of need to correct this actually and get a statement from the editor of the magazine to say what happened. And me distance myself from it because it's not actually a row to do with me. It's between the editor and the journalist. And it's not, I'm just the subject, but it's not a row to do with me. Anyway, you suddenly get a taste of what that's like. And I'd gone off racing that day. I'm on the committee at Epsom, so I'd gone racing at Epsom, but Alice was following it and sort of rang me and said, look, this has become a major issue. And it can feel very much like you're in the middle of the storm. But I wasn't in the middle of the storm, so because I wasn't looking. So suddenly you realise the power of not being in the middle of it. So I was telling Charlotte about this, Charlotte Dujardin, and said, look, when I do a major event, let's say 1 million viewers or more, so a big audience, I do not look at mentions. I post stuff on Twitter, and I'll post photos of, let's say the Wimbledon, who I've got with me for the highlights show, or photos of players or whatever, things that people might find interesting. But I do not look at mentions because I don't want to know if somebody doesn't like my hair or my shoes or my jacket, or what I said about somebody, or why didn't I talk more about so-and-so. I want a relationship with the editor and the producer of that programme where we trust each other and we are making decisions based on our professional instinct, not based on what a load of people are saying and what's trending on Twitter. Now, that's not to say we don't use it for the strengths that it has, which in terms of breaking news is really important. So I'll follow my feed, but I won't follow my mentions. Does that make sense? It gives me a sense of real power as well. It's like stopping drinking coffee for a month, which I wouldn't do, by the way, that actually you get a strength from it because you have the discipline. I don't seek approval on social media, and equally therefore I understand that the approval that you might get one week can turn into heavy disapproval the next, and neither extreme is real. Somewhere in between is real. And navigating that, I think, is going to have to become part of every broadcaster and every athlete's thinking process. It's got to become part of being a professional, of knowing how to use it and knowing how to control yourself and being really careful what you say, who you respond to. Don't engage in some massive row. Something came up the other day, because I don't Google myself and I don't search myself on Twitter, but Alice will occasionally, just out of interest, go, okay, what are they saying? Anyway, some guy had said, tell us something about an encounter you've had with a celebrity. And this chap put up, Clare Balding shouted at me once for bringing her the wrong coffee. Now, I was like, what? Really? I don't shout. I am not a shouter. I mean, I might shout at Archie if he doesn't like come here. That is the extent of my shouting. And it would be very unlike me to complain about coffee to anyone. So Alice double-checked with him when this happened and where, just to check it wasn't a complete mistaken identity. And he named an event that I had done, a swimming event. So I went back to him direct and I said, I am really upset to read this and I am so sorry. Because I thought, I do not remember it. I can't deny that it happened because that's then me saying he's not telling the truth and that's not fair. And it was, the circumstances just didn't, anyway. So I just apologised to him because I thought that's the one thing that I should do is say I'm so sorry. And I didn't even put if this occurred. I just said I'm really upset to read this. And God, I must have been having a terrible day because I don't even like, apparently I shouted him because it wasn't Nescafe. I don't even like Nescafe. So it's like, it was a really weird thing. Anyway, I thought, okay, that'll do. And then Alice said, right, don't engage anymore because suddenly you're then in a conversation situation where something that's tiny and wouldn't have been seen by anybody could blow up into something that's much bigger. So you then have to and it was silly because, to be honest, neither of us would have seen it if in the normal run of things, you just wouldn't have seen it and therefore not have. But you kind of think little things like that, you're going, but I'm not like that. So I was saying to Charlotte Dujardin, because she was really upset about the elimination and some people had not been very nice on social media and it was really, it
is distressing, isn't it?
Yeah, and also everything about her is about excellence and horse welfare. She's a really sympathetic rider. She works really hard to make sure her horses are trained properly. She doesn't use shortcuts. She doesn't lose her temper with horses. I really felt for her because everything felt awful about it. And that the team hadn't won a medal because she got eliminated. That was a major factor. And that she couldn't go through to the individual competitions because she'd been eliminated. But I just kept saying to her, I know this won't help you now because you won't feel like this now, but when you distance yourself from this and put this into perspective, remember how sick you feel and how much therefore it matters to you. This sport matters to you, and on the rainy days when it doesn't feel worth it, use that. And I was telling her this thing about the power that you can get from just saying, no, I'm not engaging with that. It really can't hurt you if you don't see it. And we are all inclined, if you see 100 comments and 99 of them are lovely and one is horrible, which is the one you remember. So knowing that your brain works like that, and actually The Chimp Paradox is an interesting book to read to understand that quite often the way you react is just part of our human makeup. It's not you being different, actually. We're all of a pattern and of a mould. And learning the things that help us, perform better, I think is pretty important.
And have you had any support or advice from the broadcasters that you're working with in terms of how to deal with that?
Really interesting question, because no is the answer. And I think there should be. And as I say, if I was 20
and coming in,
I would not have the same attitude that I have now. I'm 48. I've been through a lot.
So you've had success, haven't you? It's if you're coming in at the beginning.
Yeah, but I've had a lot of criticism too, and you learn, and you just learn to deal with things, and you learn resilience, and that's sometimes it's just about survival. It can't all be about glory and award winning. It's not always going to be like that. Not every year is going to be like that, and not everyone's going to think you're fantastic because they don't. And you just get on with it. Keep that going and work hard at it, and suddenly another 10 years on and you're still doing it.
You've been a really powerful champion for increased coverage of women's sport. What do you think is the impact for women and girls seeing other women playing?
Huge, and I see that just through my niece, and she's 9, and the things that she wants to be a professional cricketer. But she's up for anything because she's a little girl with 2 older brothers, and she wants to do what they're doing. And because I keep telling her she can. So if she wants to be a professional cricketer or a professional footballer, or she wants to ride, the riding bit is going to cost a lot more money, and she's going to need to run a business really effectively, and she's going to need to sell horses at a profit to keep it going. But the other things, once she's bought her cricket bat, she should be away.
And you touched earlier on the impact of sport, of girls and women seeing those successful sportswomen and then giving them the confidence to do whatever else they might want to do in life beyond sport.
I think there are really strong transferable skills, and I think being able to work in a team is the strongest of them. But also picking yourself up when you've fallen over and getting on with it. Having to work out solutions to quite difficult problems, having to think quickly and take risks. All these things I think are massively important in life. So for kids to have more exposure and better teaching of sport in schools, I think is absolutely crucial. And that's one of those things that one's almost got to be putting the pressure on at political level to change the school curriculum or encourage. So I have this dream, and actually I wrote the latest book that I wrote, I did this whole scene at the end about a supermarket providing sports facilities, because it's an idea that I've always thought should work. Supermarkets have huge areas, they have good parking, they want to create an atmosphere of a club so that their customers stay loyal. So I'm thinking, well, why not make that your sports club? So actually, if you go and do your shop, your big shop, your kids are playing netball or playing football or doing something on quite tight pitches. But here in Chiswick, they've got some fantastic mini football pitches and netball pitches all the way down the railway line at the back of Turnham Green. And it's brilliant going down there on a weekday evening and just watching all these kids playing different sports. But of course, it's organised, and the parents are paying for it because it's clubs that are being set up and teachers or coaches are being paid outside of school hours. And I just think that's a real shame, because that puts a lot of emphasis on the parents making it happen and indeed paying for it. Whereas I think there are different solutions. And I just think if enough pressure is being created from the kids and families themselves to say we want more sport, we want more options, and we know research shows that it makes kids concentrate better as well. It actually aids academic performance. And for those kids that go to independent schools, their parents are breaking themselves to pay for it. And what are they paying for? Then they're not paying for improved education, actually, because the teaching won't be phenomenally better than they would get in the local state school. They're paying for sport and drama and music and art and all the things that have sort of been stripped out of the state system. And I just think that's creating such a gap. It makes me very upset, because you just think, why should the rich middle class kids get all of the sport when actually it's criminal? It's really annoying, and then it creates this sport apartheid, where suddenly you can't get it early, so you're never going to get it, and you're not going to get it late either.
I'm going to bring you back to Women's Sport Profile. So since 2012, are you pleased with the change in the profile and coverage of women's sport overall? Would you say you're?
Yeah, I am. I still think there's a way to go, but credit where it's due, actually, in some cases to the media organisations, and whether that's the BBC or BT or Sky or whoever, or indeed Telegraph for doing their women's sports section, which is fantastic. I think the online world has created more opportunity for us all to become journalists. So actually there can be far more writing about women's sport just by anyone. I mean, you don't have to be employed by a newspaper to write about it. You can create your own channel if you want to. But I think also the way the top level of certain core brands has changed, and their appreciation of women's sport. So Boots coming in as a major sport of women's football, that really matters. And I go back, the boat race. I rowing at university is something I did a bit of, and consequently I present the boat race, and have done for a long time now. When Helena Morrissey made the not just request, but basically made it a point of the contract that we will come in and sponsor both your men's and women's race, BNY Mellon and Newton investment, but here's the number one clause: the women's race has to, within 5 years, be on the Tideway on the same day with the same coverage as the men's race. She made that happen. The sponsorship made it happen. And I think in lots of instances, money talks, and the businesses can change things really quickly.
Do you think that's the biggest challenge that we see right now is the funding coming into sport? Because that then drives the coverage, that drives spectators. It's understanding. Yes, it's companies understanding the commercial value of women's sports, but also then creating a framework that has a wider sort of responsibility. That it's not just about making money.
and that might be being very idealistic. But funny, I was doing a thing with Diageo, you know, the big drinks company, recently, and they do this non-alcoholic drink called Seedlip. And I'm saying, why don't you get Seedlip would be a brilliant sponsor of women's sport, because I don't like the proliferation of alcohol and gambling in particular as sponsors. And I really wish in some instances that wasn't beginning to affect women's sport, but it is. But what's the option? Now, some of the options are, you know, car companies have traditionally been quite big sponsors, certainly in equestrian sport they are. Mitsubishi for many years did badminton. Range Rover have been huge supporters, and actually their sports program of ambassadors, and they went through a stage of bringing through young talent as well.
And Kia with the cricket.
And Kia with the women's cricket, you know, they've been pretty good actually. There's a really interesting challenge as well, and I do think female athletes are really aware of this. The glamorization of women's sport. Some people really object to it. I don't mind at all, because I want, you know, athletes are by nature fit and they understand nutrition and they understand the benefit of sleep and of being mentally strong. There's so many good positive things, and they can look very different from their competing days to, let's say, you're glammed up for an awards do. I love it when athletes are on front covers of magazines, because I think that has a, you know, for most kids, they want to do something because it looks sexy, looks glamorous. And I don't think we should fight that. I think we should embrace it. And if girls at school could have ambitions that are based on you know, not having to have surgery on your face or your bottom before you're 24, I think it'd be really good.
You say that their ambition to be sexy and attractive, etc., but that's for the girls, isn't it? You wouldn't say the boys are feeling that.
No, I absolutely think the boy. What did David Beckham do? He made football sexy. Look at him, for God's sake. And it's not just. I'm not talking just about a physical attraction thing. He was in all the right places. He was driving the cool car. It's to do with the lifestyle that kids find aspirational. Now, you can't fight human nature, so work it out and. Advertisers do this all the time. They will find the thing that they know people want, and they will, you know, create the advert that says that their product can give it to you. So it's understanding what women's sport can give people that they want. And if you want the top athletes, and indeed a whole raft of kids who could be really good, if they and sometimes it's not always the most talented person. Johnny Wilkinson will say this, Kevin Sinfield will always say this, I wasn't the most talented, I worked the hardest. So it's not all about pure talent, but it's about making hard work. Andy Murray works harder than anyone, and it's about making hard work actually not be the thing people go, oh, that's really boring. Making the thing people go, God, isn't that impressive?
I could do that.
Yes.
If I put my mind.
Yes. So that's what I mean by sexy. I don't mean sex appeal. I just mean attractive, and desirable, and the thing that people will aspire to. And that's where I think women's sport can really shift that dial still. I think there's
We had that fabulous front cover with Elle magazine recently with the amazing athletes in that way too. You've taken action yourself to support women's sports coverage by sometimes not attending or attending. So you mentioned the boat race. I think that was the day of the Grand National when you chose to be there at that first women's boat race, and not attending the Open when it was at Muirfield too. So do you feel it's important to use your profile to create some social change in that space?
It's a tricky one, because I don't want anyone to feel that they have to make decisions based on, you know, what it says and what, because lots of people can't afford to make those decisions. You know, you've got to go where you're going to get paid to do the job. And, you know, sometimes people will put pressure on you to not do an event. So, for example, when I did the Winter Olympics in Sochi, there was quite a lot of pressure from LGBT groups saying, well, why are you going? And I said, because if I don't go, what is the... Yeah, I mean, to be there as the lead presenter and be gay, is that not everything that Putin hates? So let's do it. It's like, so it depends. You can take the argument either way. What my feeling was with the women's boat race, I really wanted to support it. And that, believe me, was not a financial decision that was sensible, but I believed it very strongly, and I felt that sometimes you just got to put your money where your mouth is and do it. You know, I don't regret that for a second. I think it was the right thing to do. My parents didn't understand it. A lot of people in racing didn't understand it. That's what I thought I wanted to do. And it's interesting in reshaping what I have, the messages that I want to put out there, you realise that you have sometimes, and Billie Jean King has taught me this, sometimes you do have to keep saying the same thing in a slightly different way, because every time you say it, you'll hit a different audience or their ears are listening in a different way. And until the time comes when it's not necessary, I feel like I will keep doing it. So when I stopped presenting racing, you have a little mini crisis of confidence, and anyone who's changing jobs will feel this, or making a massive decision about a shift in their lives, personal or professional. And you think, right, God, who am I? If I'm not the one who does the racing, what's my purpose? What do I do? And that's really, and it had been probably coming for a while, because that decision over the boat race or the Grand National happened obviously before I stopped presenting racing. But I thought, okay, I know what I want to do. And my attitude is never regret what you can't do. It's always find a new purpose, look forward, and what are you doing? Was right, I am really going to put my effort into this, of constantly having conversations with potential sponsors, saying to them, have you looked at women's sport? With people who are entertaining clients, have you looked at women's sport? Do you know what good value is? And constantly making a noise to the media and indeed my bosses, so either publicly or privately, saying, what are you doing about coverage in this space? What's your plan? What's your, where's your long-term investment? How are you creating more noise around this? So, for example, this year the Sport Relief netball, that's taken 6 years to make that happen. And I know it's only a small thing, and I know it's only one night, and it was really thanks to Jennifer Saunders, who was on board right from the beginning.
And that amazing underarm goal,
which is so funny. I know. And ultimately a lot of support in the end from Comic Relief and from the BBC. But you've got to be bloody persistent. You do slightly feel like you're banging your head against the wall, and sometimes you just can't understand why everyone can see what you can see. Yeah. So I had a meeting with a quite senior guy on television recently, and I was, trying to persuade them to do some live coverage of this sport on a weekend regularly. And he said to me, I don't want to have an argument with you about this. And I looked at him and I said, this is not an argument. This is me telling you that in 5 years' time, if you don't do this now, in 5 years' time, you will look back and think, damn it, why didn't we do it when we could afford to? This is not an argument. I could see him sort of sit back and go, oh my God. Because I just thought, how can you not see what I'm seeing? How do you not understand that this is changing?
Does it cause a conflict with you to, I guess, call out some of those people that are paying your wages, your fees?
Oh, without a shadow of a doubt, of course it does. Yeah.
But it's being brave to do that because it's the right thing to do, or you pick your fights as an...
I mean, it's just not in my nature to sit there and say, yes, sir, 3 bags, no, sir, 3 bags full. So I'm afraid I'm always going to be honest. Now, it doesn't mean I'm always right, but I will always say what I believe to be true, or what I think, or what my instinct's strong. I mean, really, and quite often, more often right than wrong. And I just have learned to trust it, because you know, and if it meant ultimately, let's say that certain bosses thought, right, she's, that's too difficult because she'll constantly keep wanting, more coverage. I don't want to present it all. That's not the point. I'm not making these suggestions to create work for myself. I've got enough work. I'm really fine. I don't need to be on television. Do you know what I mean? I really don't need to be. I love doing it, and I love being at the heart of the action at really big events and complicated events. And it absolutely makes my heart sing. But there are other avenues, and I would love to create opportunities for women's sports and indeed for more female broadcasters. And I think I'm in a position where you can help. But it might mean that I have to go and try and run an independent company, a production company, or get myself into a position of actually being the one who does make those decisions on behalf of a network.
Well, that's a bit, isn't it? As things change
in
order to food stand.
And that's, again, you've got to be bold enough to think, well, why not? Why wouldn't I be able to do that?
Makes excited about that now.
I know, I'd never really thought about it before, but now I am.
In October 2012, you appeared in front of the All-Party Parliamentary Group for Women in Sport and said, I believe, with Tanny and Dame Catherine Granger, Baroness Tanny Granger Thompson, women having freedom to play sports directly leads to women having political freedom. Can you explain this?
Well, I was thinking in particular of the Middle East and countries like Saudi Arabia, where I think they have finally allowed women to drive, actually, but back then certainly couldn't vote, couldn't really be seen in public, couldn't drive, certainly couldn't. I think Saudi Arabia had their first Olympic competitor in London in 2012. Now, I do think that men and women seeing women being competitive and being allowed to succeed and indeed fail, because that's going to happen in sport, I think that does change. It's a very visual representation of ambition and competitive spirit, sport is. So to see women in that space is important. Yeah, I do think so. And funny enough, when I was doing the documentary on women's football and the FA banning women's football, that was really closely linked to women campaigning for the vote. And there's one historian I spoke to who honestly thought that it was based on the establishment down here in London worrying about what northern working class women might do with their vote. So it actually was quite a long way off working because it was still the first time that women were allowed the vote. They had to
own land,
own the house or be married or whatever. So there was and the Bolshevik Party was quite active in the Northwest, and they were at these football matches. So it's really interesting. There's a drama that I've been trying to get off the ground for ages about women's football and about specifically that the movement in the Northwest and what was happening there with Ditko ladies, but also the other clubs that were around, and what life was really like. I think it's fascinating.
That political impact, I hadn't thought about that. That's extraordinary.
Yeah. So that's why I say I from history it's true. So. Look at Megan Rapinoe and the impact that she has had in the States. I love her confidence, and I love seeing that expression of whether it's fury but passion. That belief. And sure, people are going to have a go, but so what? Doesn't mean she shouldn't be true to who she is. And funny, Lucy Bronze, I've talked to a lot and interviewed over the years, but we just did a thing recently for a book where we're kind of interviewing each other. Lucy's got a lot that I think she'll say more and more as she gets more senior and less beholden.
And that's the challenge, isn't it, for athletes within that system to speak out against selectors or something.
Okay, going back to the racing thing, if you talk to a female jockey, they will all say, the opportunity is just the same. They're so frightened of being the one that is labelled feminist. They're so scared of that. You think, well, hang on. Yes, Bryony Frost is getting lots of opportunities, and so is Rachel Blackmore, but my God, they've had to fight for that right. And
not be them true selves to articulate.
Well, they may think what they're saying is true, but I still think there is a fear amongst female jockeys that they don't want to make this a gender war. Now, I don't want to make it a gender war, but I still think there are not the same opportunities, and you can look at the data; it shows it. And what going back to what I said, I'm talking about top class races, not just rides at Carlisle or Windsor on a Monday night.
Nothing wrong with Windsor on a Monday night.
No, Windsor on a Monday night's very nice, but it's not the highest quality racing.
If you had your childhood again and horses weren't in it, are there sports that you feel you would love to have played?
I'd love to have played netball, and I would not tall enough, I'd be tall enough for centre. I'd be okay at centre. I'm really taken by the team spirit in the netball squad as a whole, and I love the whole Back to Netball campaign. I've seen a lot. Amarad Brazy's become a good friend, and I've been to London Pulse a few times, and actually that's going to be pretty critical in terms of making netball a bigger success, to have a really strong London side and to get good attendance at the Copper Box week in, week out, I think would be huge, and I'd love to see that happen. And I go down there occasionally and take my niece and try and help promote it a bit on social media. But the Sport Relief netball match as well is about showing it can be for everybody, and creating something that's fun and entertaining around sports, similar to what the last leg has done for Paralympic sports. When you can just make more, surround sound it makes the sport much higher profile. So I think that's an area that women's sport again can look at and try and work on. Right, how do we?
Package.
How do we make this whole and how do we make the noise more consistent and different sounds to that noise? And that's, so it's not just all about the build up to a match and the reports after it. What else is going on? And some clubs are really good and some sports are really good at the behind the scenes stuff and putting things on YouTube and following stories through. People like that. They like to feel invested. And I think London Pulse, God, I'd love to try and help them get a documentary on all the stuff behind the scenes, really the struggle of getting sponsors, the struggle, because as a business, it would be borderline. I mean, I can't think for 1 second that they're even breaking even yet. But that is interesting in itself. How do you build something from scratch in an area that is associated with netball because they have their, Super League final there? Their grand final.
Quad series.
And the quad series is there, and the Olympics obviously has made the Copper Box a very known venue. But how do you make it the home of London Pulse? That everybody go, the Copper Box. Oh yeah, that's where London Pulse play.
How do you switch off yourself when you're not doing all that you're doing? Is sport part of your leisure time?
Yeah, I play golf.
Are you good?
Not as good as I'd like to be. Alice is very good. She plays off 9. Actually, she might be about to come down to 8. Yeah, I'm playing in the Wentworth PGA in a couple of weeks, and Alice is going to caddy for me. So tell me what to do. And I really enjoy that. And I never quite understand the question about how do you switch off. It's like I don't understand the work-life balance question. I don't understand it because I just spent 2 days down in the country kind of looking out for my dad because mum's away. It's exhausting. Like, real life is exhausting. That is not a switch off. It really isn't. So I reckon I spend all my life switched off but switched on.
Yeah,
I mean, I'm not stressed. I love what I do. I'm much better at travelling. I don't resent the time travelling anymore. I just, can read a book. I mean, I'm fine.
I did hear someone talk recently about it's not about a work-life balance. It is about merging the two so that all of your life is enjoyable and, relatively stress-free.
Yeah, exactly. And not, I'm not desperate to go on holiday. I love my holidays when I go, but I just really enjoy what I do. I love life, and I look in the diary and I go, okay, well, this is interesting. I'm pretty booked up all through September. I'm pretty busy. Because I've got World Road Race Championships in Yorkshire, so I'm really busy then I get to October and there's a few gaps and I'm thinking, well, not many actually, but anyway, I'm thinking, what am I going to do? Okay,
you could write another book.
I could, and I will start writing another book at some point. I will. The next year's a big year, and if I have a slightly easier autumn, that's fine.
Yeah. Just in closing, what do you say drives you today? How do you measure your success?
Oh gosh, I think, I don't know, and I'm not one who sits going, it's been a successful year because I think because I am always looking at the next thing. I'd love to get that drama commissioned. I'd love to try and get a slightly different spin on the chat show and be able to do that. I'd love to work on more factual documentaries on subjects that interest me.
We're going to start the production company.
Or run the channel. I just think success for me is knowing that I'm giving my all to everything I'm doing and that I'm really enjoying it and feeling satisfied by it, and that's success.
I'm so grateful to Clare for taking the time to meet with me and share her thoughts on all things sport. I can't wait to see what exciting projects she takes on next. If you're enjoying the Game Changers podcast, please take a moment to subscribe and rate it on iTunes podcasts. It really makes a difference to our ranking and it helps us to reach new audiences. You can find out more about all my guests from Series 1 and 2 at promotepr.com/gamechangers. The Game Changers is produced by the team at What Goes On Media. My rather brilliant executive producer is Sam Walker, with Rory Alskery on mixing and sound production. Next week, I'll be talking to Karen Finlay, the former Scottish rugby captain who now coaches Harlequins women. Along with her formidable sporting achievements, Karen is also one of the most senior women in the Metropolitan Police, a chief superintendent.
I've learned a lot of good hard lessons in sport that I harp on about within my day job to this day and age, that I speak to my fellow peers within the police and I say, I don't know why we don't do more with sport, because sport is it's really at the cutting edge, I think, of performance.
Yeah.
You know, you don't have to just go from industry to industry. You can actually learn a really good little lessons from sport.